Hello and welcome to AviaDev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. I'm delighted that today I'm joined by somebody making their podcast debut, but somebody who will be a familiar face, a familiar voice and a familiar name to many of you in the industry. Maureen Kahonge is the Senior Manager, Business Development and Communications at the African Airlines Association, or AFRAA, as they are known within the industry. AviaDev Africa are delighted to support AFRAA, and we've been working together through the years because we share a common goal of supporting African aviation to prosper. So just like me, Maureen hosted loads of events during the pandemic, virtually, but we're now a matter of weeks away from the 54th Annual General Assembly, which will take place in Dakar, Senegal, between the 11th and the 13th of December, hosted by Air Senegal. Maureen joins me on this podcast to preview the event, but also to provide an outline of what AFRAA's current priorities are for its members. So welcome to the podcast, Maureen.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the opportunity. I always do look forward to collaboration between AFRAA and...
Wonderful. Well, welcome aboard. You're very welcome. You can turn left when you get onto the AviaDev plane. You get business class seats for sure, definitely. So, yeah, it's great to have you. I can't believe we're on episode 240 and it's our first time speaking with each other. But obviously, the Secretary General's been on the podcast a few times before. So, before we take a look at the event itself, let's zoom out a little bit. So we're here in mid-November 2022. How are your members doing? What's the consensus opinion and how has the recovery been? Has it been in line with expectations? Has it been above expectations? Are we bouncing back quicker than we thought? What's the general feel?
The general feel is that the African airline industry is on a growth recovery trajectory from the impacts of COVID pandemic. And if you look at the traffic in terms of the figures, the current month, we're looking at figures for October. Airlines capacity deployed reached 82.5% of the 2019 levels. And if you look at the routes, the international routes for African airlines actually have exceeded the 2019 levels by 0.31%. And from all our members, our 44 members, 8 of them have actually gone to exceed the number of international routes that they operated before COVID. So the recovery is positive. We are not yet out of the woods. And we are looking at some hurdles in the recovery, notably coming from the aspect of the steep rise of the jet fuel price, which is impacting airlines. The current global average price per barrel is $142. So this is really impacting airlines. And in terms of the financial performance, the 2022 estimate by AFRAA on the impact of COVID on the revenue loss is $3.5 billion US. This is collectively for all African airlines. And comparing this to the revenue loss that we saw for 2021, it was $8.2 billion, and 2020 was 10.14 billion. So if you look at the revenue loss attributed to COVID, you can see that we are making some significant improvement.
We're on the right track, but we're still in the red, I suppose, is the way to look at that. And we have to sort of mitigate that a little bit as well by saying that the first 3 months of 2022 were pretty much lost because of, markets were still closed really until sort of March time. So it's been a very, very strong recovery, and we want to see that continue. So with those things that you've mentioned in mind, what are the most pressing issues? If you were to say, what are the top 3 pressing issues that AFRAA is occupied with right now that are keeping your airline members up at night?
First and foremost, the top priority for AFRAA and the air transport industry in Africa at large is the main subject of the sustainability. You're looking at air transport sustainability. This is what we are keeping on top of our agenda. We have, as AFRAA, led a laboratory that we did in 2022 mid-year, and we developed a roadmap for air transport sustainability in Africa. So what we did is we put together air transport stakeholders from different subsectors, and they developed actions with out-of-the-box solutions that are structured under 5 projects: fuel and customs taxes, high taxes and charges, and navigation fees, also free routing area, and the implementation of the single African air transport market, and as well as partnership between airlines, hospitality, and tourism subsectors to see how we can improve intra-African tourism. So this aspect of the air transport sustainability, grouped under 5 projects, is our key priority that is driving into the 2023, because once we address the sustainability of African airlines, we're able to have the issue of enhancement of intra-Africa connectivity, enhancement of competitiveness of African airlines, and looking at, in the short term, how can African airlines survive, and in the long term, how can we sustain the growth of African airlines. The second priority for AFRAA is safety. We have various initiatives to support African airlines and prepare them for IOSA and for ESA. We also signed in the month of September a memorandum of understanding with Flight Safety Foundation, where we have specific actions that will be driving the agenda to help African airlines on safety. And our third priority is on training. We have various initiatives for right skilling to meet aviation's current and future human resource needs. And this we are achieving through our synergies with the member airlines, ATOs, as well as the AFRAA training unit. So this could be summed up as the key top priorities for AFRAA.
And all very, very important. As you say, safety is the number one priority, and everything else then comes off the back of it. And we'll come back to the whole SATAM issue, because that was heavily discussed this week. There's been some progress and AFRA has been involved there. So we'll come back to that shortly. But let's focus in a little bit more on the event itself, because of course, the event's been designed to address many of those issues. It's an opportunity for your members to come together and create this roadmap towards the success that we want to see. So the theme that you've chosen for this year's AGA is Acing the Roadmap to Sustainable African Aviation. So just to elaborate, explain a little bit more. Why did you choose this theme, and what are some of the key topics you're going to be talking about?
To put this into perspective, the AFRAA Annual General Assembly and Summit is the biggest aviation summit in Africa that brings together CEOs of African airlines and decision makers in the air transport industry to come together and deliberate on the direction that the air transport will take for the African continent. This year's theme, as you rightly said it, is Acing the Roadmap to Sustainable African Aviation. So why did we choose this theme? I've talked about the roadmap that the air transport stakeholders sat together and developed to have out-of-the-box solutions to drive the sustainability of the African continent. So the themes that we have lined up in the program are such that all the leaders and decision makers from the sector of sport and tourism will put their weight behind the discussions to create the much needed enabling environment to sustain the air transport business. So we have topics around the aspects of how can airlines from the CEO level, the CEO's roundtable, go to the ground and look at the strategies that they can put in place that will enable them to go through this recovery trajectory. And then we'll talk about the aspect of environment. So what does Africa do to get us to the target of 2050 net zero? We'll also talk about the aspects to do with training. So what should we do? What are the initiatives and the particular actions that we need to fill the training gaps in Africa? We'll also talk about aspects to do with aircraft financing and how do we put together strategies for traffic and trade to develop these two subsectors in a complementary manner, looking at the fact that traffic follows trade. So we need to work together as the air transport subsector, as well as the trade subsector, and see how we can synergize the efforts to open up intra-Africa trade and to open up intra-Africa traffic. So we have a number of lined up themes on all these areas to ensure that we come up with clear actions as well as resolutions. The AGA, at the end of the assembly, we will come up with resolutions that will be implemented the course of next year. Some of the resolutions we have on the aspect of environmental sustainability and on training. So this sums up what is lined up for the AGA.
No, brilliant. I think sustainability is such an interesting concept because, of course, it refers to many things, to be sustainable, to be financially sustainable, to be environmentally sustainable. It's a great theme from that perspective. And to be sustainable, you need that conveyor belt of quality trained professionals that are being born on the continent and are not going to be brought in from outside. And if we want to see the growth that we want to see, then we need to invest now in that future. And we've talked about this for some time. So some concrete steps on that will be great. So what about from the speaking faculty side? Who are some of the speakers that you'd like to highlight to whet the appetite of those attending and those that are interested in joining you in a few weeks?
We have lined up the main players in the industry at the CEO level. For example, from our airlines, we have on the roundtable Ethiopian Airlines. We have the new CEO of Ethiopian Airlines will be joining us. It's good to hear from the side of the ET experience, what they did and what they are planning to do. So lined up on that roundtable as well, we have the CEO of Rwanda Air, CEO of Egypt Air Holding Company. And we also have a new twist. We have CEO of Han Air joining us on the CEO roundtable for the first time. We have other CEOs also in the program, but for the CEOs roundtable, the topic is quite practical and quite catchy and very relevant for the current situation. The topic is around reconciling airline strategies for sustainability of the air transport industry in Africa. So you'll listen to all the CEOs talking about at their airline level what they are planning, what is their perspective, and at also the decision-making level across the continent, what needs to be put in place to match the airline plans for us to work in tandem towards sustainability of the air transport sector in Africa. We also have a breakout session that is being facilitated by Airbus on aircraft financing in Africa. So we'll listen to an Airbus perspective on the best strategies for aircraft financing, what are the challenges and opportunities. So the other executive session as well will be on the implementation of the single African air transport market, and that will be facilitated by AFCAC. We'll talk about later the current developments that have taken place. We had this week on Monday the YD anniversary, and quite some tangible actions have been put on the ground, and that will be a session where AFCAC will debunk in detail the plan for effectively achieving the single African air transport market. We'll also have other sessions or other panels. There is a very important session where we'll be talking about the environmental sustainability. So we have the various OEMs, aircraft manufacturers, telling us from their OEM side, how are they partnering with the industry to help us to achieve the 2050 net zero targets. We also have a panel on the repowering of the future of travel through innovation. So here we'll have SITA, we have SEBA, we have Amadeus, we have HITIT, and Collins Aerospace, who will be talking to us about various strategies on digitalization, noting that this is quite important. From the lessons we've learned from COVID, we need to really digitalize the airline operations for sustainability. And last but not least, after the conclusion of the annual assembly, we have the AAIG Aeropolitical Forum. This is the African Aviation Industry Group. We'll have 3 hours of discussions where we will debunk what was discussed at the AGA into more practicable actions that each of these organizations that form part of the AAIG will individually look at including in their annual plans for 2023. So we'll be looking at the forum discussing all these issues under the theme, act together to begin the roadmap. We want to begin this roadmap, get tangibles, and get to move on to achieve these tangibles. So that is what you expect to experience at this AFRAA's AGA.
Fantastic. Well, I say to everybody, I absolutely love the Aeropolitical Forum. So if anybody's going that's listening to this, you should definitely make sure you stay and stick around for that group, because it's a really interactive and it's a wonderful session. And the other topics that you picked up on are very pertinent with everything that's happening in the world with interest rates anyway. And we know that airlines always suffer, and African airlines suffer as well, from incredibly high interest rates on leases, etc. So hopefully that issue isn't going to get worse and somebody's got a wonderful solution to solve that issue. And the other elements that you talked about are absolutely vital. So before I let you go, I did want to come back to you on the SATAM and the PIP, the project implementation plan that was launched by Funke Adeyemi and the AFCAC team on Monday down there on the 23rd anniversary, I believe. It was presented, and I believe there was 15 countries initially that are signed up, but there's been a couple of extra ones that have added over the last couple of days, I was told. So looking into 2023, are you optimistic about the prospects? And will it be a year that we see liberalization coming to the continent?
First of all, I take the opportunity on behalf of AFRAA to commend AFCAC on the launch of the SATAM pilot implementation project this week during the YD anniversary celebrations. This was actually a very historic event, and this is very much in line with the project on the single African air transport market under the laboratory roadmap. What we have seen that is under the PIP is that the project is being launched to implement SATAM by 15 SATAM states that have been identified with favorable environment to proceed with SATAM implementation. It's very much in line with the targets that we had set in the laboratory group on the SATAM, of which AFCAC is a lead stakeholder. So one of the strategies that we are looking at to move forward with successful implementation of SATAM is we want to look at the establishment of the club of ready and willing states. So the PIP is very much in line with that. So you have the club of ready and willing. So the states have been targeted already. And then now it's to proceed to the will. And looking at starting from that approach, then the other states can now follow suit, having seen that these states have continued to successfully implement SATAM. That's the first approach. The second approach is to look at Africa in smaller bits. If we can break Africa into smaller bits within the regional economic blocks, such that we look at, for example, the East African community, that as a domestic, we start to implement SATAM within the RECs, and then having various RECs having to implement SATAM. And once we have successfully implemented SATAM within the RECs, then now we can look at the continental approach. So those are the two approaches that have in place under the roadmap of the laboratory. And we are very much pleased to see that the PIP has been launched. So this will go hand in hand to ensure that we achieve this objective of the reality of SATAM. We need actually to make SATAM a reality. We are very optimistic about this, and the collaborative stakeholder approach is very important. And one of the main reasons that I've seen the SATAM taking too long to be a reality has been the aspect of the regulatory text. For many years, there are certain regulatory texts that had not been finalized. And for 2022, we saw these texts being finalized. And we are quite happy to see that AFCAC has done a lot of work to ensure that we have achieved this. So one of the texts was the dispute settlement mechanism, which provides member states appropriate avenue to settle their disputes. So this has been finalized. And then the other text was the African Civil Aviation Policy, the AFCAP. We also had the other text, the guidelines for the negotiation of BASAs with third-party or regions. So these three texts have now been finalized. And with the appropriate regulatory structure in place, we are now able to have the next step to effectively implement SATAM. So we're very happy, we're very excited that these impediments have been circumvented, and we have already in place the roadmap, we have in place the PIP. So looking into 2023 and beyond, we are quite optimistic that we can make SATAM a reality.
No, wonderful. I was there for the launch of SATAM in 2018 at the African Union. I remember it very well. Obviously, that will be coming up to its 5th birthday in January, I think. So it's great to see some movement. I think the challenge we've always had is that this is assigned at a state level by the Ministers of Transport, but it needs to be adhered to by the airlines operating in that market. That was a bit of a disconnect with some of the countries that the country had signed, but the airline didn't really welcome it. So that's something that I think we'll have to address and we'll have to see. And I'm sure those questions will be asked at the AFRAA event. You know, your country has signed this. Are you going to adhere to the rules? So for any of our listeners that are still keen, that are still sitting here thinking, oh, goodness, it's coming round quickly, the AGA, is there still time to register and what do they do?
Yes, there's still time to register. The AFRAA website, AFRAA.org. We have on the homepage the tab for events. Just go to the events tab, click on the 54th AFRAA AGA, and you can actually get the registration details on the AGA site. We have quite a good level of participation. Various member airlines have registered, and we have a total of 22 CEOs currently registered. We're looking forward to receive other CEOs to join us for this event. And we have also the various solution providers, service providers, aircraft manufacturers, OEMs. So registration is still open and you can access it through the main AFRAA website.
Wonderful. I will put those links in the show notes so you can go directly there. I will also put a link so you guys can connect with Maureen on LinkedIn. You can also connect with the AFRAA team and follow their page as well. I'll put those links in the show notes too, so make sure you do that so you keep up to date with their activities as you go. Maureen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for making your debut, and it's always great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John, for the opportunity. I do look forward to continued collaboration. There's a lot of conversations to have on the podcast. So we do look forward to continued collaboration. Thank you very much.
100%. Yeah, we're going in the right direction, but we've still got a long way to go, I think is the way forward. And we share a lot of the sentiments that you've mentioned today. So thank you everybody out there for listening. If you did enjoy the podcast, hit that share button now, send it to somebody in your network you think would benefit. Don't forget to subscribe as well. And we will be back for the next episode very soon. Take care and thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.